All right, let's get right into it. We're tackling a headline today that sounds, well, almost unbelievable. The world's most powerful central banker is facing a criminal investigation. So we're going to break down what is really going on here.
Okay, so let's just dive right in. I mean, this is the question, right? It's the shocking thing at the heart of this whole story. When you hear the head of the Fed is under investigation, your mind immediately goes to what? Interest rates? The stock market? Some huge financial scandal? It has to be something big, right?
Well, believe it or not, the official charge has nothing to do with any of that. It's, get this, about a building renovation. Yep, a construction project. And that right there is where this story gets really, really interesting. Because as the source material suggests, this investigation might not be about renovations at all. Okay, so let's start with the official story. What are the facts of this, well, pretty unprecedented situation?
So here's the rundown. Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, he's the subject of this criminal investigation, and it was opened by the U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C. Now, the specific allegation, it's that he lied to Congress. Lied about what? The scope and the cost of this massive multi-year project to renovate 2 historic Fed buildings in Washington. But to really, truly understand what's happening here, you have to look deeper. You've got to understand the tension that's always kind of simmering under the surface between 2 incredibly powerful and often competing institutions, the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve. See, they each have their own tool, their own superpower, if you will. The Fed, which is independent, and that's key, they control monetary policy. The best way to think about this is like the nation's financial thermostat. They turn interest rates up or down to keep the economy from getting too hot with inflation or too cold with a recession. Now, the government, they control fiscal policy. That's all about how much money it spends and how much it taxes.
And right there, that's the fundamental reason they so often clash. Think about it. The government is run by elected officials. Their incentives are almost always short-term. They're thinking about the next election, about getting quick economic wins that voters will feel. The Fed, though, totally different story. It's run by appointed officials. They're deliberately insulated from the day-to-day political drama. Their job is to focus on what's called the dual mandate, keeping prices stable and making sure employment is as high as possible. They're not worried about pleasing voters in the next election cycle. They're playing the long game. And believe me, this tension, it didn't just stay theoretical. Oh no, it absolutely exploded into a very public, very loud battle over one specific thing that affects literally all of us: which way interest rates should go. I'm sure you remember this number. After the pandemic, when the economy just roared back to life, all that pent-up demand plus all that government stimulus money, it sent prices absolutely soaring. Inflation peaked at a staggering 9.1%. That wasn't just a number. It was a massive, massive problem for the economy, and of course for the Federal Reserve.
And you can really see the scale of the challenge Powell was up against right here. Just look at that gap between the reality, that 9.1% peak, and the Fed's target of 2%. That enormous difference is exactly why he and the Fed had no choice but to slam on the economic brakes. And they did that by raising interest rates and raising them fast.
And this is where that policy disagreement just boiled over. On one side, you had the Trump administration, and they wanted interest rates cut like yesterday. Cut them drastically. Why? Well, lower rates mean cheaper mortgages, cheaper car loans. Voters love that stuff, and it gives the economy a nice sugar rush in the short term. But the Fed, they were looking at that 9.1% inflation number in the rearview mirror and were terrified of it coming back. So they chose a much, much more cautious path, lowering rates super slowly to make sure prices stayed stable.
Okay, and this is where the story really takes a sharp turn, because the source material we're looking at here, it frames this entire criminal investigation not as some legitimate legal issue about a building, but as a political pressure tactic, a weapon.
And the administration's frustration? It was anything but private. President Trump launched this incredibly public campaign against the very guy he appointed Fed chair. And he used this kind of intensely personal language to try and just hammer his reputation and pressure him into changing course on policy. And then Powell fired back. He responded directly to the investigation, and in a pretty extraordinary public statement for a Fed chair, he flat out claimed the charges were a pretext. He basically said, look, this has nothing to do with the building. This is retaliation. This is payback because I refuse to bow to political pressure on interest rates. So you might be thinking, well, why not just fire him? Here's the thing. You can't. By law, a president cannot remove a Fed chair just because they disagree on policy. They can only be removed for cause.
And that means proving gross misconduct or that they actually broke the law. And that's why, according to the sources framing, an accusation like lying to Congress becomes so powerful. It's one of the only ways to even try to get rid of a Fed chair. But make no mistake, the legal bar to actually prove it is incredibly, incredibly high.
Okay, so this brings us to the big, final, and maybe the most important question of all. Why should you care? Why does any of this matter to you, to your wallet, and to the health of the entire U.S. economy?
Well, the whole reason the Fed was set up to be independent in the first place is to act as a kind of fail-safe. The idea is simple, really. You need to have one institution that's focused only on the long-term health of the economy, completely free from the temptation that politicians always face, the desire to juice the economy for a quick win before an election, even if it means causing painful inflation for all of us later on.
And look, this isn't just some abstract academic principle. While Powell was getting hammered with all this political criticism, he was also getting really high praise from some of the most respected names in the world of finance. I mean, you can't get a much more powerful endorsement than from Warren Buffett, who said he thought Powell had done a terrific job navigating all of this.
And it's also so important to remember that the system itself is designed to be bigger than any one person. Interest rate decisions, they're not made by Jay Powell in a dark room by himself. No way. They're made by a committee of 12 voting members. It's another crucial safeguard, designed to ensure stability and prevent any single individual, whether that's the Fed chair or even the president, from having total control over our economy.
So when you strip it all away, this whole affair really forces us to ask a fundamental question. Is an independent Fed a critical safeguard protecting our economy's long-term health from short-term political games? Or has it become an unelected, unaccountable roadblock standing in the way of the agenda of the government you voted for? That, right there, is the core tension that this whole investigation has dragged out into the open for everyone to see.